How's it going, people? Welcome to United View and welcome back to the Tactical View. Manchester United have beaten Brentford with 2 goals in injury time from Scott McTominay, and tactically it was quite an interesting game, quite a lot to digest, not all of it positive for Erik ten Hag's men. Before we start, we'll have a quick look at the teams. The only notable changes from a United perspective, the main one was getting Sofiane Amrabat into midfield, Lindelof coming in at left back with Maguire and Johnny Evans in the centre of defence, Bruno Fernandes on the right wing, Rashford on the left, Mason Mount behind Rasmus Højlund. From a Brentford perspective, they had a few injuries. Pinnock came in and he was absolutely brilliant. I've got to say, before we get into the show, Ethan Pinnock, what a performance in the way of pretty much everything. It was heading stuff, it was blocks, it was tackles, everything. He just seemed to be in the way up until Scott McTominay did what Scott McTominay sometimes does and turned into prime Ruud van Nistelrooy, let's say, for this example. So, before we, that's enough of the lineups and such things. We'll now start the show by answering the question on pretty much a few people's lips in terms of why do Manchester United take short goal kicks only to then immediately smash the ball 80 yards or however many yards it is up the pitch. And on paper, it is an interesting question. You would think, if you're going to play a long ball anyway, why wouldn't you want to start by just getting set up immediately for that long ball? But actually, there's some very good tactical reasons why you wouldn't do that, and some even better tactical reasons why, if you're going to play that long ball, you don't just start from the keeper playing it straight away. You actually have the centre-back passing it to the goalkeeper to then do it. So we'll explore that in a little bit more detail at the start of this show. Now, the first thing to note, and we've got this sort of matched up here in terms of the way that Brentford were pressing. So they started out with a front two here of Mbeumo and Wissa, however you're supposed to say it. And those two strikers started opposite Johnny Evans and Harry Maguire. So the idea here was that because they start opposite and ready to jump, it's really high pressure, but it's a lot of bodies up the pitch for Brentford. In terms of what they were doing in the wide spaces, obviously in theory they've got a 3-5-2 system. So in terms of matching up against the back four, maybe it's a little bit unnatural and they'll have to go asymmetric at certain points. And the way they chose to do that here was with Jensen and his role in comparison to Aaron Hickey on the other side. So Jensen's one of the 3 midfielders for Brentford, and he was actually starting sort of on the right of a front four in the press, with Hickey starting as the left wing back in theory, but in the press he was starting more as a left midfielder. And the asymmetric nature had Hickey, the wing back, a little bit deeper and Jensen a little bit higher. And the idea from Brentford was they could try to funnel United to our left side, something that they probably targeted pre-game because they knew it would either be Lindelof, who's obviously right-footed, or potentially Diogo Dalot, who again is also right-footed, out on this left side. So they probably identified that as a potential weak spot and an area where they could win the ball back when pressing. So what they were trying to do was funnel United over that way as much as possible. And the idea was, as soon as a United player touched the ball, Wissa would curve his run round to try and lock the ball into that side of the pitch. So he'd go and block off Harry Maguire first to stop United playing this way, and then he would go and start putting the pressure on Andre Onana. So that basically shut off any option from United to try and play from Evans to Onana, then out this side. So the idea behind this whole idea of United playing short first is that if you play short first, it encourages the Brentford team to want to press and try and win the ball back. Now, I think as everybody who's played football at any sort of level knows, if you're going to take a long goal kick, what tends to happen is you basically end up getting the whole team up the pitch really high, and you end up basically playing a sort of mini 10 versus 10 game in a really small area of the pitch. For example, if we highlight this here, you could say maybe you might see all 20 outfield players in this particular area of the pitch, knowing that the keeper's going to put the ball into that area somewhere there. Now, if you've got a lot of players that are great in the air, a lot of dominant aerial presences, or you've got players that are really technical in tight areas and you've got maybe one good player in the air, maybe that suits you because you're condensing the game into a small area where either incredible physicality or incredible technicality can help you to play out of that area and still come out with the ball. Reality though, for Manchester United, at this moment in time, that is not how the squad's comprised. So what you'll see from United is that we've got a lot of players who are not necessarily that great physically, not great in the contact, but also not that great technically either. We've got a lot of players who you've got to describe as big space players. The likes of Rashford, the likes of Højlund, and the likes of Bruno Fernandes as well. Players that prefer to be in big open spaces. So clearly, that idea of taking that long goal kick from Onana to start with and just piling everybody into a small area doesn't really suit United and potentially leaves us vulnerable to an opponent who's better at doing that type of situation than United are. So the counter counterpoint to that is encourage opposition teams to try and press us and therefore open the pitch out by initially playing a short pass. So by doing that and setting up like this, we've encouraged Brentford to set up high as we discussed, and the idea was as soon as that ball goes from Johnny Evans to Andre Onana, that gets the ball in play and encourages sort of an open play state. So what you then tend to see from a United perspective is Casemiro drops in wanting the ball, Amat would also drop in wanting the ball, and as soon as that would happen, you'd have the Brentford centre mids following them really high as well. So Yana would push in high and Norgard would step up onto Amrabat as well. And then you'd have Mason Mount dropping into the space that's sort of vacated, and Ajer, one of the centre backs, was stepping up really high on Mason Mount there. So what this was doing by baiting Brentford to step really high and forcing them to try and come and press, it was leaving our three best big space players in big spaces in 1v1 duels. So you would expect in this situation what you're leaving at the top end of the pitch here is Marcus Rashford, Rasmus Højlund and Bruno Fernandes all in this area in a 1v1 duel. And the idea is that if you leave these three in this sort of space and you let Onana play the long ball to any of those three into the space, it gives you more chance of successfully pulling off a goal kick and coming up with what your team are best at in terms of creating chances, which is getting the ball into this area and letting these guys run in behind, which is what they love to do. Now, in terms of letting Onana take that, Onana's probably the most accurate long ball player of any United sort of deep player, so that's why he was the one booting the ball. In terms of playing that short pass earlier, as we said, it was to bait the press, but also you'll notice this short pass is often played relatively slowly. And the idea behind playing it slowly is that it gives a little bit of time, a few seconds for the likes of Bruno, Højlund and Rashford to get a run on their marker. So this is where you get the advantage over just maybe setting up like this anyway and just kicking it long straight away, is that if you do that, any of these three are just in a static duel up against the centre-back, where particularly Rashford or Roerslev, who's not really the centre-back, but still, Rashford's not necessarily great in static duels, doesn't always jump for things, but by taking this pass from Evans to Onana, and it's deliberate that that pass is played a little bit slowly at times, it gives a couple of seconds for these guys to get a run on their marker and get themselves into that bit of space. So in terms of the goal kick, that is why we take it short. That is why the pass comes in a little bit slowly from Evans to Onana. It's to give these guys space to get a run in these duels and really accentuate our best attributes in those transitional type situations as much as we possibly can. So I think the reality at this moment in time is United probably aren't good enough to play through opposition teams and play through an aggressive press, particularly with Amrabat and Casemiro. Casemiro giving the ball away countless times once again against Brentford. Amrabat's okay at it, but I think you need someone else more technical in there as well to actually be able to play through. So the reality is we want to accentuate our best attribute, which is these guys in transition and create those situations. And the closest United got was actually really close to a goal, where one time this was happening, the ball from Johnny Evans to Onana, Bruno Fernandes found himself in a really nice pocket of space in here, used that time whilst the ball was travelling from Evans to Onana to get a run on Collins, get in behind there, and a great curved pass from Onana, found Bruno, ended up with Bruno slipping in, I believe, Mason Mount down this side, and Mason Mount unfortunately had an effort blocked by that man, Ethan Pinnock, once again. So, in terms of that question that is on a few people's lips, hopefully, in reality, a lot of people I know are thinking it because I get asked it all the time. That is the reason why United take these short goal kicks to then go long immediately afterwards. And it worked to a decent degree of success against Brentford in generating a few of our transitional opportunities. Now, the next thing I want to talk about in this particular game is Manchester United's pressing. So we've talked there a little bit about how Brentford were pressing in a lot of different situations. I now want to talk about how United were doing the opposite, or the same, when Brentford had their goal kicks. So, this is something that Tactical View viewers, regular viewers, will have seen us discuss quite a lot at reasonable length, is that the United press is it's a little bit misunderstood, because we do have a decent amount of success at regaining the ball in the final third, which on paper is absolutely brilliant. That's exactly what you want to do. And it generates all of these transitional situations that United want to generate, because that's where our players excel. However, I think the balance is a little bit wrong. So the reward side of it is there because we're winning the ball back high up a lot of the time, but the risk side isn't really there, because when we do get bypassed, when teams do play through us, it's far too easy for a fullback or a wide player in particular to be able to just run 30, 40 yards up the pitch completely unchallenged. And the reason that's happening is actually a lot to do with something that we saw exposed time and again in this game against Brentford. So, In terms of the way that Brentford build up, as we mentioned earlier, Brentford set up nominally in a 3-5-2 formation or a 5-3-2, depending on how you want to describe it. However, they tend to set up in the smaller games with a back four, and you could see that in how they were building up in this game. So although it was a 5-3-2 on paper, the way they're actually set up in build-up was a little bit different. So what you would see is you would see Nathan Collins, so if Strakosha's on the ball here, the goalkeeper, you'd see Collins, the left-sided centre-back, drop in here to sort of split. You'd see Pinnock drop in on the opposite side there. And you would see Ajer, the right centre-back in the three nominally, but he would actually end up tucking across into more of a right-back position. And what that would mean for the others is Roerslev then, the right wing-back, ends up pushing on into more of a right forward or right mid position. You would then see Aaron Hickey, the left wing-back, dropping in a little bit deeper, and that gives them this sort of more symmetrical back four shape. Unfortunately, that's pretty much where the symmetry ends. And as you'll see as you may have seen earlier with the pressing stuff for our goal kicks, Brentford do a lot of things asymmetrically. Again, probably because they spotted a weakness on United's left side. So in front of that back four, you tended to see a double pivot here, Norgard and Janelt dropping in. And then what was going on in front of that was a little bit interesting. So you'd have sort of a back four, a midfield double pivot, so the 4-2 structure that a lot of teams are using these days. And up front, you've got the front two, and then you've sort of got Jensen here sort of floating, and you've also got Roerslev in this position. So you've sort of got these two behind Mbeumo and Wissa. So the idea from Brentford, much as it was on their defensive side from the United goal kicks, was to funnel the play towards United's left side. They were doing exactly the same thing in possession by having the overload on that side specifically. Now, what we tended to see quite a lot was when Strakosha was on the ball here, maybe play out to one side, and the way United were pressing was quite similar to what we often do, in that Bruno would start relatively wide, sort of half and half job here, so he's opposite Collins to start, to try and block any passes going down centrally. But then as soon as the press was engaged, let's say Højlund would come across here, for example, and he would again, like Wissa was doing, curve his run to try and lock Brentford in this side. What you'd then see is Bruno would then jump, and he'd curve his run inwards there to try and press Collins whilst cutting off Hickey, which is fine, that's one thing. You then see United man for man in midfield, as we often go, with Mount and Casemiro on top of the double. Mount and Casemiro on top of the double pivot from Brentford, Amrabat following Jensen there. And the problem here was that once Bruno had gone and pressed Collins and curved his run to try and block that pass initially, what was happening was Collins was simply able to pass back to Strakosha, and after a few nervy moments early on, what you were seeing was that Strakosha was really easily able to just drop the ball into an area for Aaron Hickey. Now, the problem isn't necessarily specific to playing against keepers with good distribution. The problem is that because this space is so enormous with no United players in, and the reason for that is obviously with United being man for man in midfield, and obviously Roerslev, the asymmetric nature on this side, Lindelof's got to stay there. The issue is that Dallow's left in a difficult situation here. Ten Hag doesn't want Dallow to go and press Aaron Hickey here, because that then leaves Maguire defending a big channel, it leaves Evans defending a big channel, and it leaves Lindelof having to defend a big channel as well against Roerslev. So the problem that Erik ten Hag's got is that he doesn't trust his centre-backs in these defensive duels, 1v1, in big spaces against quick players. So because of that, he has to leave Dallow really deep to try and cover some of that space. And it's not just Dallow, it's any fullback that we're playing. They don't tend to jump too often. And what that means is that any goalkeeper, and at Premier League level, the majority of them are capable of doing this, is just all they've got to do is just drop that ball, chip it in anywhere in this area, and the fullback gets it. And the problem with that is that as soon as that happens, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 United players out of the game. Amrabat's man-marking Jensen, so if he comes across, there's a really easy ball inside into midfield, so he's basically out of the game as well. And that means that Hickey can just run all the way up the pitch pretty much unchallenged. So in terms of the way United press, this is where we talk about risk and reward. In terms of Bruno's pressing run here initially, the idea is that if Brentford had played the ball side to side, Bruno can sort of press inward like this to try and force Collins to play into this area where United are man for man. And the idea there is that because we're man for man, 1v1 duels, all it takes is one United player gets a foot in and we've got a really good goal scoring chance. So that's the reward side of it. The risk side of it, to go along with that reward side, is the exact opposite here, where because Bruno's pressed in all the way here, all it takes is finding a free man here, whether it's the keeper, whether it's the other centre-back, and just drop that ball into an enormous area there and the opposition team can get the ball up the pitch, take out many, many United players simultaneously. And the issue is that it's not just a tactical problem in terms of the Brentford player running up the pitch unchallenged, but also physically. It forces these front United players to be sprinting back every single time if we don't want to give away a dangerous opportunity. So not only is it causing us a problem tactically, in terms of actual tangible stuff on the pitch, it's causing us a problem physically as well by giving the players an extra sprint they don't always need to do. Solution to it, trust your centre-backs. I know it may seem a little bit difficult on paper, but trust your centre-backs, push the full-back on and hope that you win the ball high up. And if you don't, trust these guys to recover. So that's a bit about United's pressing, a bit about Brentford's pressing. The final thing I want to come on to today is going to be, if I can find the appropriate board, is Manchester United in the final third of the pitch. Now, Thomas Frank went on Monday Night Football the other week and he had a lot of stuff to say about Brentford's defensive setup. And fair play to them, seeing it in the flesh and focusing on sort of the way they do things, it was quite impressive and it did work fairly effectively for large parts of the game. But Ten Hag made an important tactical change at half-time, which changed the game a little bit in United's favour, but also showcased our weaknesses at the same time. In the first half, what we saw from United, we had the majority of possession, and if we say United moved the ball to this right side of the pitch to Bruno, in the rare occasions that he actually was in that right wing berth rather than tucking inside, what we saw was exactly what Thomas Frank said Brentford do in terms of they move the full-back out really quickly or the wing-back out quickly, near side centre-back comes across, near side 8 comes across, strikers drop in here, and the rest of the team shuffle across like this. And the idea here and the point is that it makes it really difficult for any team to play through in this particular area, and the strikers dropping in mean that if the team in possession want to recycle the ball or switch it, they've got to go all the way around the back of the pitch, and because of that, it gives Brentford enough time to shuffle themselves across. Now, United actually played into Brentford's hands quite a bit with the way we set up in that first half. And something that we've often said on the Tactical View is about how Ten Hag likes this principle that he calls minimum width. And the idea behind that is that you attack as narrow as you possibly can get away with to mean that your players are closer to the ball when you lose it and minimise the chance of a counter-attack. So in practice, what that was looking like was like this, with United, rather than using the entire width of the pitch, United were essentially condensing our attacking play into sort of this particular area. If the ball was on the right side of the pitch, what you tend to see, the main point here is Rashford's just wider than the wing back, and you've got Lindelof narrow in here in support. In case we lose the ball, he can then go and press one of the Brentford players straight away. Now, obviously, against a team like Brentford that make it really difficult to progress the ball and sort of create a chance on the near side by overloading that area with defensive players, what you really want to be doing is stretching that pitch as much as possible and switching play. But in that first half, because Lindelof was tucking in really narrow, wasn't really overlapping Rashford, he was just staying narrow, Rashford was fairly narrow. And the same thing on this side as well, Dalot was pretty content staying inverted until he absolutely had to overlap, rather than being static and providing width. That was making it very easy for Brentford to actually end up defending. So the tactical change Ten Hag made in the second half to fix that was he told them, right, look, they're doing this with their defensive setup, exactly what we knew they were going to do because their manager told the entire world about it on Monday Night Football. The way you beat that is that rather than playing this minimum width type stuff, you go and stand out there, you go and stand here, and when that ball does go round to Rashford, Lindelof was much more keen to overlap him there, and obviously brought on Eriksen for Casemiro. So we'll get rid of Casemiro there. About time too, he has been absolutely terrible for quite some time. Eriksen comes on instead of Casemiro. Let me get rid of some of these arrows and such things on the pitch there. And the idea was now that it's a lot easier for United to switch the play quickly if we've got somebody out there holding width. Now, it wasn't just that particular change. Erik Ten Hag also switched Mason Mount to this right side, brought in Bruno Fernandes here, and the idea behind that was Mason Mount could hold the width on the right side for as long as he was on. Then he brought on somebody who's even better at holding width in Anthony. And you could see straight away that made a positive difference. Anthony just being there and being comfortable with staying wide right on this side stretched that Brentford defence and made it easier for United to try and switch the play a little bit more quickly, whether it was via Maguire playing a long ball, which he was pretty good at, did very nicely, or whether it was just playing these balls round but a little bit quicker and with a bit more pace, with Eriksen on the pitch now instead of Casemiro, and the players told to just zip the ball about a little bit quicker. So it was this increased sort of usage of wide areas that was really important for United, but the flip side of it is it exposed some of our weaknesses. And what I mean by that is when you lose the ball and the team are a lot wider, let's say if Dallow's out here and now you've got Lindelof out here instead of in here, you've got fewer players close to the ball, which means it's easier for Brentford to play out, easier for Brentford to find potentially a long ball into Mbeumo or into Wissa. And you could see at times that was meaning that Brentford were getting a little bit of joy by playing direct on the counter-attack. So in terms of sort of a review for Erik ten Hag's tactical changes, it was positive in terms of helping our attack, but it was negative in terms of exposing us more defensively. And the main problem, the main reality that this all comes back to, is the defensive side only is a problem if you lose the ball. And that's exactly what United were doing. Our ball retention wasn't good enough. We had players giving the ball away sloppily in stupid places, making stupid mistakes. Bruno had a lot of stupid flicks in bad areas. Rashford had a couple of poor losses, and Casemiro was pretty poor as well. The more you give the ball away, the more your defensive weaknesses get exposed. On the flip side, the more you keep it, the wider you can afford to attack, the easier you can then make it for yourselves to break down a defence like Brentford. And with that in mind, I want to have a look at some stats here that we've got about Amrabat versus Casemiro. So, obviously they played a different number of minutes, so Casemiro got hooked at half-time, whereas Amrabat pretty much played the full game there with 87 minutes. In terms of touches, Amrabat's got far more touches than Casemiro had, but this below here is where it starts to get more interesting. In terms of accurate passes, Amrabat with 64 out of 66, or in other words, 97% successful passing. Casemiro here with 20 out of 24, in other words, 83%. Now, 83% for the levels at which Casemiro has been playing this season is actually quite good by his standards, but you can see there's a pretty big gulf there between 83% versus 97%, and that amount of fewer ball losses and that extra circulation, the extra touches, the extra passes that Amrabat's making make a huge difference for United in terms of sustaining possession, being able to sort of keep the ball and sort of throw wave after wave after wave of attack rather than just chucking long balls into the box and hoping for the best. So that was really important, as with the key passes here in terms of Amrabat 3 versus 1 for Casemiro. And in terms of long balls, Amrabat supposedly a little bit weaker in the long ball, but actually was pretty good at doing that with 5 out of 5 completed versus just 1 for Casemiro. So I think that, for me, what that illustrates is that Amrabat is the type of profile United need. Somebody in that 6 role who can just keep the ball moving, doesn't have to create 5-10 chances a game. Just keep the ball moving and rely on the good players, the sort of creative guys in front of you to do their job. If you can give Bruno Fernandes a constant platform of service, he will create you chances. The same with Marcus Rashford, the same with Rasmus Højlund, the same with Antony, the same with Garnacho. Give them the ball reliably in positions that they can get 10, 15, 20 times a game. They'll get used to the patterns, and that's how you build things, not just random long passes that Casemiro has been doing lately. So that, for me, is why Amrabat is crucial for United and why we desperately need him in the midfield rather than out at left-back. And for me, that is why the biggest boost injury-wise after the international break will be the return of Sergio Reguilón. That's all for today, folks. Hope you've enjoyed what you've seen. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you agree with me about Amrabat versus Casemiro? Do you think maybe, as many people on social seem to do, that I've got some sort of ridiculous Casemiro agenda? For me, I'm just using my eyes. I think he's been terrible this season, apart from the cup game against Palace. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below, and we'll see you again very soon for another Tactical View. Peace.